I want to look ahead a little bit because, in addition to being an author and activist, you also were a surrogate for Bernie Sanders in the election. And, for a lot of us, the election did not turn out the way that we were really, really hoping that it would. And so there's been this period amidst the pandemic of also trying to figure out what the path forward, what that looks like. So I'm curious, from your point of view, as someone who's been involved in it as an activist and an organizer, where should we be throwing our weight? Where can, progressives or people who are concerned about these different issues, where can they have the most effect when, they look to the two different choices? They don't necessarily love either of them.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm one of those people. I was a surrogate for Bernie Sanders, and I was very proud to be part of a campaign that aligned with my principles and values, even when I didn't sometimes even agree with Bernie on some things. As you know, we don't agree on the issue of Palestine, Israel, but he overall, his policy platform, his domestic policy platform really spoke to me in the work that I've done for 20 years. I'm telling people right now, especially those of you who supported Bernie, who are true progressives, who are true at heart leftists, and people who care about marginalized people, start focusing on down ballot races. John, every 4 years, we want to wake up and start talking about who's going to be the president. And I'm telling people, we got to do the work in between. I want to know which progressive you're supporting that is supporting the Green New Deal, that's supporting the abolition of ICE, that's supporting, a platform that is about just foreign policy, that is about, making sure that we are bettering our relationships around the world, that's focusing on Medicare for all. There are so many of them, John, some of them, inspirational, and people that we need in Congress and that we need in the Senate, that we need in state legislators, that we need in city councils across the country. So that's where I'm focusing my effort. I'm still excited about the 2020 election because there are so many wonderful people running for office. There's a Nabila Islam in Georgia. There's Ihsan Laki running in Massachusetts. I mean, there are people, there's Charles Booker. There's like so many wonderful people that are running. And there's also people we need to keep in office, like the Rashidas of the world, the Ilhans of the world, the AOCs of the world. So that's where I'm focusing. And as to go to the presidential, because I know people will think I'm like, it's a cop out that I'm not answering that question. I'm saying to people this: I'm not going to tell you what to do. I think people are capable of making the right decisions. The decision that I'm going to make in this 2020 election is I'm a New Yorker. So in New York, as you know, we're not a swing state. So I can really vote for whoever I feel like it. I can even write Bernie Sanders in. It's just not going to make a difference in a presidential general election as a New Yorker. But if you're in a swing state and your vote does matter in this election, I'm asking you to look at someone like Biden, not as a candidate that aligns with your values and principles per se, not as someone that you're excited about voting for, but look at him as your opponent in the White House. Look at him as someone that come January 2021, we're going to be ready to go all out with organizing, mobilizing, and making sure that Joe Biden is being held accountable to our communities. The reason I say that, John, is because this current administration is not an administration that is our opponent. We can't fight them. We can't move them anywhere. They are pretty solid on where their positions are. And every single day, as you know, they target our communities. They're separating families. They are threatening countries to war. They are stripping people of health care. They have been inept in this pandemic. People have literally died at the hands of the callousness of this administration. So for me, if you live in a swing state, I hope that you believe that the right thing to do is to make Joe Biden our opponent in the White House so we can continue our movement work.
That is very interesting. Thinking of it as choosing who your opponent will be, because often that choice is often presented as, are you going to endorse this person? Are you going to pick them up as a replacement for whoever you were supporting before? And it doesn't have to, of course, be thought of in that way. So that is very interesting. And I totally agree. There, like, even in the first term, obviously, Trump could not be pushed on any issue. And that was when, hypothetically, there were potential consequences for his actions. He's stripped away all of those. There's not going to be any inspectors general going into a second term and all of that. So that's a great point. I also want to mention, you mentioned Nabila Islam. We saw news earlier today that Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had endorsed her campaign. She's a candidate we've had on multiple times on the show. And I agree, putting your attention into the down ballot races, like, of the little bit of hope and inspiration, the positivity in politics over the past few years that I've had, almost all of it has been driven by a few names. And you named some of them, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and AOC and all of that. The idea that we could potentially have 2 more or 5 more or 15 more individuals like that seems like, at this point, a best case scenario for the movement going forward. I certainly could look forward to that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why everyone's like, how are you still excited about this election? I'm like, listen, there are young women, Black people, members of marginalized communities. There are Muslims. There are former refugees. There are amazing, inspirational people that come from the very directly impacted communities that we claim to support. So why don't you, if you were a Bernie Sanders supporter, just pivot. Find one of those local folks that were running on a Bernie Sanders platform, put your money on them, make calls for them, text for them. And that's what I'm doing, because I think that that is the way to true democracy. Is all politics is local. We cannot wake up every 4 years, John, and remind people that there's an election. There's an election every year, a local election every year. And that's the kind of power that we need to build on a local level. And eventually it will trickle up, not trickle down. It will trickle up to that presidency.
You know, this will probably have to be my final question, but I'm curious. Let's say that we end up with Biden as our opponent in the White House. Are there issue areas where you feel like he could be successfully pressured on, that he wouldn't just, say something that sounds good, but then continue the policies of past administrations? Well, what issue areas give you a little bit of hope?
I think there are 3 issue areas where I think Biden could be pushed if we build the political will and the movements, and so that we don't go back to bed like we did after Obama got elected. Everyone was like, wow, so amazing, we made history. And all of a sudden our movements went dormant. And that was the problem. It wasn't Obama's fault. I don't blame Obama. I blame us and our movements. And for Biden, I think it's going to be healthcare, criminal justice reform, and immigration. I think those 3 particular areas are areas where I truly believe in my heart, if we are consistent, if we are persistent, if we're building power, we're mobilizing, we could truly push him into a transformative place. And even honestly, if we're able to build power around Congress and members of Congress, we may be eventually able to do Medicare for all. I think that it's not true that he said earlier on that if he got a bill to his desk, that he would veto it. I think that he doesn't believe we can bring a bill to his desk. And I truly believe we can if we focus our efforts there.
I certainly hope that you're right on all those issues, but perhaps that one even more so. If it were to land on his desk, the idea that he would veto it seems incomprehensible. So I certainly hope that you're right. The book is We Are Not Here to Be Bystanders. Linda, there you go. It's been a long time coming. Thrilled to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, John, I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.